Let's talk about the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Mitch McConnell. Let's talk about heroes and zeros. Because decency and democracy, like justice, matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So we lost a hero, a pioneer, a champion of women's rights and equal rights, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg had a last message for we the people, and it was delivered by her granddaughter. Justice Ginsburg said in her final days, quote, "My most fervent wish is that I will not be replaced until a new president is installed." Even in her final days, Justice Ginsburg was fighting for we the people. Now, there are others who will pay tribute to Justice Ginsburg far better than I ever could. People who were close to her, who knew her well, who were students of her life and her legacy and her legal opinions. But I want to try to honor her in another way by taking up another fight, and it's the fight of our times. I want to talk about fighting monsters, constitutional monsters, serial abusers of our Constitution, government officials who are acting lawlessly to the detriment of our democracy and our people. I want to talk about Mitch McConnell. Within hours of America learning that we had lost a hero, Justice Ginsburg, Mitch McConnell decides to figuratively dance on her grave by issuing the following statement. Quote, "President Trump's nominee will receive a vote on the floor of the United States Senate." This, of course, is the exact opposite approach that Mitch McConnell took 4 years ago when we were facing a similar circumstance. We lost a Supreme Court justice in the final year of President Obama's term. And of course, Mitch McConnell said, there will not be a vote. In fact, specifically, here's what Mitch McConnell said. Quote, "The American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president." Now, Mitch McConnell's hypocrisy is no surprise to anybody. But let's dig in a little bit and let's talk about what should be done about it. First of all, what role does the Senate have when a president nominates somebody for the Supreme Court? Well, under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, the Senate gets to provide advice and consent on that nomination. Specifically, here's how that part of the Constitution reads. "The President shall have the power, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to nominate judges of the Supreme Court." Pretty straightforward, right? President nominates, and the Senate gets to provide advice and consent on that nomination. But 4 years ago, Mitch McConnell rewrote the Constitution. As but one man, he said, that's not how we're going to do it. Here's what Mitch McConnell said. He said, only in the first 3 years of a president's term will the Senate fulfill its constitutional obligation to provide advice and consent. In the last year, the 4th year, we will block it. We will violate the Constitution. We will not provide advice and consent. Why? Well, he said, because the people have to have a voice. And the people have to wait until the next president is elected to have that voice on who the Supreme Court justice should be to fill that vacancy. Folks, can I tell you how absurd that is? When we go to the polls to vote for a president, do we say, okay, We know we're electing a president for 4 years, but we only want that president to act. We only want to have a voice for the first 3 years of that president's term. In the last year, we don't care what the Constitution says. We don't want the president doing anything, including nominating a Supreme Court justice. That's absurd. That's unconstitutional. That violates the advice and consent clause. And that's what Mitch McConnell did. He acted unconstitutionally when he said the president doesn't get to act in the 4th year of his term. Can I tell you what I would have done under those circumstances? Now, a couple of caveats. I never would have been in a position to have done anything. I will never run for office unless and until campaigns are publicly financed, and I think that's extraordinarily unlikely. Nor do I look back and criticize prior administrations. I've done a video a day for months now. This is my justice grind. And you don't often hear me criticizing the Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the Reagan administration, even though I served under every president in the federal government from Reagan to Trump. I don't think it's all that helpful or useful to look back and criticize past administrations. I do think it's worth trying to learn lessons from the way earlier administrations handled certain challenges. So that's why I want to talk about this for just a minute. You know what I would have done? If Mitch McConnell said, I will act unconstitutionally, I will rewrite the Constitution to say that in the 4th year of a president's term, nothing, no advice and consent will be allowed. That's a violation of the Constitution, folks. Plain and simple, and Mitch McConnell did it. I would have said, fine, if you are not going to fulfill your constitutional duty to hold a hearing and give advice and consent, then I will deem that the Senate has waived its right to give advice and consent. Justice Merrick Garland, please take your seat on the Supreme Court. You know what would have happened? Mitch McConnell would have had to have gone into court, federal district court in Washington, D.C., and convince a judge that he, Mitch McConnell, gets to rewrite the Constitution by saying there will be no advice and consent on a presidential Supreme Court nominee in the 4th year of a president's term. He couldn't convince a court of that. He would have had to have convinced a trial court in D.C., the appellate court in D.C., ultimately the Supreme Court, that he was allowed to rewrite the advice and consent clause of the Constitution. He couldn't convince a court of that. But we didn't do that. We didn't fight the constitutional monster. And let's be clear, Mitch McConnell is a constitutional monster. He's a constitutional cannibal, eating alive our Constitution for his own nefarious political purposes, damaging we the people in the process, right? Not only in announcing new constitutional rules that he thinks he gets to set, no advice and consent in year 4, which of course he's contradicting now, we'll get there, but he also sits on bills that were passed by the House of Representatives, a duly elected House of Representatives, right? Republicans and Democrats alike. They pass bills, they send them to the Senate, and Mitch McConnell kills them. He will not let the people's voice be heard. They can't be debated, they can't be voted on. Mitch McConnell is a constitutional serial abuser, and we all know it. You have to fight the monster. But we've been feeding the monster. What, hoping the monster is going to become nice, is going to become law-abiding, is going to become constitutional? When you feed the monster, you get more monstrous behavior. And that's what we are seeing right now. 4 years ago, Mitch McConnell rewrote the Constitution, saying you must never, never, never have a Supreme Court confirmation hearing in year 4 of a presidency. And yesterday he said you must always, always, always have a confirmation hearing in the Senate during year 4 of a president's term. This is where we are. This is where we are. You can't win the battle you don't fight. And we've been feeding the constitutional monster, the constitutional cannibal, the serial abuser of the Constitution. We've been feeding and feeding and feeding it rather than fighting it. Rather than fighting an executive branch that lawlessly disobeys all congressional subpoenas, and we say, oh, well, we're not going to try to enforce them with our inherent power of contempt. We've been declining to impeach a criminal attorney general and now a criminal postmaster general. Oh, well, we're just going to ride it out until the election. We're feeding the constitutional monsters rather than fighting the constitutional monsters. And you can't win the fight unless you take the fight to the monster. You know, what Mitch McConnell is doing is not just rough and tumble politics. It is an abuse of the Constitution. It's an abuse of we the people. When he rewrote the Constitution 4 years ago to say no advice and consent in year 4 of a president's term, that was unconstitutional. When he sits on bills every day that are duly passed in the House of Representatives that represent the will of the American people, and he kills them, he sits on them, he refuses to allow debate on them, that's unconstitutional. We all know it. You can feel it. He thwarts the will of the American people. And, you know, he will continue to abuse the Constitution in every way possible to his nefarious political ends if we continue to let him. And let's face it, we've all seen him lining his pockets and laughing at the American people the whole time. The question is, are we going to continue to feed the monster by doing nothing? Or are we going to take the fight to those who would abuse the Constitution? When I say take the fight, lawfully, peacefully, but aggressively and relentlessly. Take the fight to the constitutional monsters. Honor the memory of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who fought for us up to and including with her dying breath. Let's fight the monster. Stay safe, folks. I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.